In these final days before the election, the battle for the White House comes down to winning over slices of voters in key swing states.
One of my most recent travels was to San Luis, Arizona, right along the U.S.-Mexico border. It's majority Latino. I mean, it's 90% Latino and 90% non-college educated.
Sabrina Rodriguez reports on voters for The Post. She's been talking to people across the country about the election, including many Latinos. And San Luis stands out to her.
You know, we talk so much about if Latino voters are shifting to the right. We talk so much about the divide in education that we've seen in polling this year. And we came across San Luis, Arizona, where no other city in the country moved more towards Donald Trump in 2020.
This is according to deep analysis by our colleagues at The Post. San Luis is still majority Democratic. There are plenty of diehard Democrats there, like Lisette Servin.
Well, I always consider myself a Democrat. I don't think I would ever be a Republican. So I believe in democracy and doing things right.
Lisette is running for city council as a Democrat. When Sabrina met her, Lisette was at a noisy cafe, about to go out canvassing for herself and other local candidates.
And, you know, she was there working the room with all the different Democratic organizers, you know, putting together packets of flyers for other local candidates.
But Lisette is seeing this shift toward Trump, even within her own family.
And then with your family and friends, everyone's sort of on the same page as you. Also a Democrat, also feeling the same way?
Yes, except one. I didn't want to mention it, but my son. He is just... I wish I can show you my phone right now.
She's talking about her 18-year-old son, Isai.
And he's the one that's challenging the whole house because it's like a little Trump right there. We have a little Trump in the house.
She says, we have a little Trump in the house. But Isai, Sabrina called him from her car, and he told her Trump is the best choice for his future.
I think he has the chops to run this country. You know, the country is basically a giant business. You know, everyone that is here wants to make money. They want opportunities, stuff like that. And I think he's a man that understands that. And I think he's a man that can really put jobs out there and can really help.
Isai is the type of Latino voter that Trump and other Republicans have been trying to win over, often young and male. Voters who, in very blue places like San Luis, Democrats maybe thought they could count on.
There's a lot of conversation around if there's some realignment happening ahead of this election. And I think emergence of something new really captures what I've been seeing. It is young Latinos who did not vote in the last election, that were maybe not old enough to vote, coming out and supporting Donald Trump.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Elahe Izadi. It's Wednesday, October 30th. Today, the fight to activate Latino voters is coming down to the wire. My co-host Martine Powers speaks with Sabrina about what she saw in San Luis, Arizona, and in other battleground states. Sabrina will also break down the fallout from racist and sexist remarks about Latinos at a recent Trump rally in New York City. Okay, here's Martine.
So, Sabrina, as you said before, on this reporting trip, you were in Arizona, and specifically you were in San Luis. Can you tell me a little bit more about San Luis?
Yeah, I mean, it's overwhelmingly Hispanic, Latino community. A vast majority of the people speak Spanish at home, very agricultural heavy community. You see more development coming into town now. Like so many people brought up to me the fact that they got a Starbucks recently and, you know, pointing out, oh, look, those houses over there are like the new developments and kind of pointing out that development. But it's always been a historically agricultural community that focuses on lettuce and dates, a lot of farm workers that have come through there. And it really is a small town feel where, you know, if you drive through the main street and you make a wrong turn, you're in line to cross the border. You're in line at the port of entry, which people also hype up is currently being expanded just because of the amount of traffic between the U.S. and Mexico.
So we spoke a little bit earlier about Isai and Lisette Servin. Tell me what sticks out to you about your conversations with them.
In the case of Lizette, I mean, she's been a lifelong Democrat, very involved in local politics, talked at length to me about how she was excited about Kamala Harris as this change candidate, as this person that'll be great for women and Latinos and working families.
I mean, I really want Kamala to win for two reasons. One, because it's a woman, right? Everybody, and that's what my son said, Mom, you can't be saying that because it's just a woman. No, I mean, I really have hopes. I really have hopes.
I think she reflected what I've heard a lot of women say since Harris became the nominee. This feeling amongst women that she has restored some level of hope and excitement that I don't think we saw earlier this year when President Joe Biden was still the nominee. And then to see the other side of it, talking to her son, Isai.
Hello?
Hey, is this Isai?
Yes, it is.
Hey, it's Sabrina from the
She was able to connect me with him, but it was a weekend where he was sleeping in that morning, and he ultimately was down to have a phone call with me. So while I was driving back to Phoenix for other reporting, I was able to hop on the phone with him.
Yeah, I know that. I met your mom this morning, and she was like, you should definitely talk to my son. He has a lot of thoughts about politics.
Yeah, I do. I'm not going to lie.
Isai just recently turned 18 and is going to be voting for the first time. And Isai is a senior in high school. He talks about how, he feels his friends are on the same page as him politically. And, it's been just in the last few months in school that they've talked about the election, they've talked about politics and sort of where he's, formulated his opinions on all of this.
Well, originally, I started really getting, not into politics, but when I noticed, the Joe Biden situation, his lack of cognitive, his little issue, that's when I started kind of noticing, okay, maybe I should probably look into this because I'm getting older, I'm going to have to vote soon.
And Isai, to be clear, doesn't identify as Republican. I mean, he talked about, how he really considers himself to be independent. And earlier in the election cycle, before Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dropped out of the race, that was who he was planning to support. And it was after RFK Jr. dropped out that he saw him endorse Donald Trump and ultimately was all in on Trump.
Then when he dropped out of the race and he endorsed Trump, that's when that was kind of my tipping point when I was like, okay, I'm probably going to end up voting for Trump.
I mean, I think the number one thing he talked about and just repeatedly said to me was about how Trump is a businessman and Trump is going to run this country like a business. And, he's looking for a job at the moment and talks about how hard it has been. He talked about, seeing his mom struggle.
And, I mean, economically, we're kind of not doing so hot. I mean, right now, my mom, she struggles with groceries and whatnot. Comparing that to a couple years ago when she could go buy a lot of groceries with the same amount of money that she can, today. You know what I mean?
He feels that it's Trump that is going to be able to provide more jobs, is going to be able to provide higher paying jobs. And he feels like Trump, rewards hard work and sort of looks at the economy from a similar lens to him, whereas he sort of sees Democrats as believing more in handouts and sees Harris as someone that is unqualified for the job, as he described it to me.
I feel like that's particularly interesting to me that he is talking about how part of the reason he wants to vote for Trump is because of his mom, because of the economic struggles that his mom has gone through. And yet his mom doesn't want him to vote for Trump and wants Harris, and how two people facing the same reality and the same set of challenges can see two very different political solutions here.
Absolutely. I mean, they have such different ideas of who is going to make things better. They both agree that they want things to get better. They both agree that things need to change and improve. Lizette doesn't deny that, the economy hasn't been the strongest, and she doesn't deny that, she wants to see a stronger economy in the years ahead. But they have both arrived at this different conclusion of who can accomplish that and what policies or what personality around a candidate it's going to take to do that.
Do they try to convince each other to come to their side?
They do. I mean, they both talked about how they'll debate at the dinner table about politics. And in that cafe, we really saw, Lizette started scrolling through her phone and showing me how her son has been trying to convince her as well by sending her all these TikToks on politics. One was from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., talking about why it is that he endorsed Donald Trump.
I want to share with you the biggest reason that I stepped out of the presidential race to endorse Donald Trump. It's an issue so big that many people don't even want to look at it. And I'm talking about the slide toward nuclear war.
And then another was two Black women in Chicago outside of the DNC criticizing Harris for pandering to them by having major artist and rapper Meg Thee Stallion at one of her recent rallies in Atlanta.
To portray. They're getting all our favorite rappers. They're having Megan Thee Stallion twerk and all of that to gain because they think that that's going to make us vote for them. And that's not.
And that never got my vote.
And that will never get my vote.
Why do you think Lizette is so upset by the idea of her son voting for Trump?
I think Lizette's in the position of many Latinos that have been deeply offended by the way that Donald Trump speaks. This isn't really just about a policy difference, a difference of opinions over, what are the policy solutions at hand. It's the fact that Donald Trump has repeatedly used dehumanizing language to talk about immigrants, and the fact that he continues to do so on the campaign trail, and that that's such a central part of his pitch, that's a central part of just his political persona. So for her, the idea that her own son can support someone that uses that kind of language is deeply frustrating, even if he has, policy reasons behind why he's making that decision.
So tell me, during your reporting in San Luis, how common was it to meet people who shared Isai's views?
It is certainly not the norm. It is certainly not the majority. You still overwhelmingly hear from Democratic voters, people who are registered as Democrats, who are planning to vote for Harris and for Democrats down the ballot. But you do see more presence in the environment. I mean, just driving around San Luis, there were so many Trump signs everywhere. And talking to local officials there, they would tell you in 2020, you wouldn't have seen that. And many people talking about how they were getting mail ads in support of Donald Trump, and they actually had more information about Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. So it's just coming up in sort of the ecosystem, the environment, where they're hearing so much about Donald Trump that he could even be an option in a way that you just wouldn't have heard them refer to Republican candidates in the past.
Interesting. So let's zoom out for a second. Help me understand how the trends that we've seen in San Luis reflect some of these patterns that are happening nationally.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've seen is that non-college educated Latino voters are gravitating more toward the Republican Party. They're looking at the Republican Party more so as this party of the working people, this party that values hard work. And it's something we've seen in the last couple of election cycles, especially with Donald Trump's, more populist message.
Mm-hmm. Why is this shifting? What's going on there?
From talking to voters, it's a question of perception. The perception that many mentioned about Democrats is the Democratic Party focusing more so on social issues and not enough on the economy, on making their lives better on a daily basis. So for them, that really came down to it, where they might support abortion rights, abortion access, or they are, supportive of LGBTQ issues and such, but they just feel like, okay, but it's coming at the cost of paying attention to the economy. It's coming at the cost of them paying attention to how to lower grocery prices or lower gas prices. And again, that's not the overwhelming majority of Latinos by any mean. We see in poll after poll, Latino voters are still with the Democratic Party. A majority are supporting Kamala Harris. But for a portion of this population, they're saying, I want to see more emphasis on the economy. I want to see more emphasis on how I can get ahead and provide better for my family. And they are thinking that the Republican Party is that answer. And the reason that matters is, this election can come down to a few thousand votes in each of these key battleground states. Arizona is a state that Joe Biden won in 2020 by just a few thousand votes. The same in Pennsylvania. So when you're talking about just several thousand Latino voters weighing whether to go vote, that can be the game changer on Election Day.
After the break, Martine and Sabrina get into recent Trump rally comments about Latinos and how these comments are being received in battleground states. We'll be right back.
So, Sabrina, you were talking about the reporting that you did in this place, San Luis in Arizona, this small, heavily Latino city that has started to shift away from Democrats in recent years. But I want to step back for a second and talk a little bit more about the national picture, how the Trump and Harris campaigns have been trying to appeal to Latino communities around the country. And of course, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me, and I imagine for other people who have been following the news this week, were the comments that were made at a Trump rally on Sunday. He was in New York at Madison Square Garden, and a comedian at that rally jokingly compared Puerto Rico to, quote, an island of garbage. And I think we have tape of that.
There's a lot going on. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay. All right.
This obviously was a very shocking comment. We actually spent a whole episode of the campaign moment on Tuesday talking about these comments, what they mean. And so for folks who are interested in that, they should definitely check out the most recent episode of the campaign moment. But Sabrina, from your perspective and your reporting, I wonder, what have you seen of the response to this joke, to this comment from Latino voters?
The blowback has been huge. There's no question about it. I just spent the past couple days in Pennsylvania talking to Latino voters and specifically talking to Puerto Rican voters who are a key constituency in Pennsylvania. There are more than 600,000 Puerto Rican eligible voters in the state. And one of the people I met was Tairi Pagan. She's 41. She's lived in Allentown for the majority of her life, but was born in Puerto Rico. And she said that, she wasn't planning to vote at all until she heard those island of garbage comments.
I was like, nope, I'm not voting. But then this comment came out, and it changed my whole perspective in this election. I would love to see a woman in House. I would like to see changes.
For people already supporting Trump, though, that wasn't necessarily a game changer. I talked to Samuel Negron Jr. at the Trump rally, also lives in Allentown, and he talked about his pride being Puerto Rican and pointed to a large Puerto Rican flag he has tattooed on his arm.
I was so angry. Oh my God, I was double angry because I've been out here for 4 years going, Trump's not racist. You know what I mean? 4 years of that, and I'm like, that just went out the window. But I also learned from dealing with all this stuff, every time something controversial comes out of that campaign, there's something else behind it.
But Negron said that he was sticking with Trump. And beyond talking to voters, we've seen a lot of celebrities of Puerto Rican descent coming out and speaking out on this issue. We saw the biggest one that has been a moment of excitement for Democrats has been hearing from Bad Bunny, who is, one of the biggest superstars in the world. On Sunday, he posted a video of Kamala Harris explaining her plans for Puerto Rico and threw his support behind her. And just a couple days later, he posted a video on his Instagram just talking about Puerto Rico's history and included the caption, garbage. So clearly making a reference to the comments made at the Trump rally.
And the comment that was made at this rally by the comedian, do you think that's reflective of how the Trump campaign has approached Latino voters throughout the election cycle?
This moment was a little different. We saw the Trump campaign try to distance itself from the moment. Trump then, was boasting about how nobody has done more for the Puerto Rican people. And, he said in his Allentown rally that nobody loves the Latino and Puerto Rican community as much as he does. So it's sort of the initial reaction of stepping away from the comment was unique. And then Trump sort of moving into how he's the best for Latinos and how he's going to deliver for this community was pretty standard Trump. Now, I will say, with Trump, some of the outreach has had a messy rollout. We saw in months prior, he announced the endorsements from multiple Latino reggaeton stars. The first one was him announcing in a mostly white audience at a rally in Pennsylvania that he had been endorsed by Anuel and Justin Quiles, who are two major reggaeton artists.
And two amazing Puerto Rican musical legends. They're legends, Justin Quiles and Anuel. Do you know who they are?
He invited them on stage to speak, and as he's inviting them on stage to speak,
come up here, just fast, fellas, come on. Because I don't know if these people know who the hell you are. But it's good for the Puerto Rican vote. Every Puerto Rican is going to vote for Trump right now. We'll take.
And weeks later, he then, in a rally in Nevada, also rolling out the endorsement from Puerto Rican Dominican reggaeton star Nicky Jam, brings him on stage. And as he's announcing Nicky Jam's endorsement, he is calling Nicky up on stage and says, "She's hot."
Latin music superstar Nicky Jam. Do you know Nicky? She's hot. Where is Nicky? Where is Nicky?
And Nicky Jam is a man.
Oh, look. Come here.
And I think it's worth noting that because of what happened on Sunday with the Madison Square Garden rally and the comments made by the comedian about Puerto Rico being a garbage island, that Nicky Jam actually pulled back his endorsement of Trump.
So those moments certainly created plenty of memes, certainly created plenty of criticism from Latinos and from Latino Democrats. But on the other side of that, what we've seen with Trump's message is not treating all Latinos as the same or not, trying to put them in some type of box. He's just trying to appeal with them with the same economic populist message that he's put out to get support from other communities as well.
And then what about the Harris campaign? What is the message that they are putting out to Latino voters?
Well, I think that the clear example is just how they've responded to the Puerto Rico comment. I mean, they moved very quickly to try and highlight that moment, make sure people know what was said at Trump's rally, but also they've, tried to position themselves then as that alternative, as the person who's going to deliver for the Puerto Rican people, who cares about Puerto Rico. And that's just looking at how they've been handling to this situation with the Puerto Rico comment. But more broadly, I mean, they have been acknowledging that, Latino voters are persuadable voters, that they're not a group of people, they're not a community that cannot be looked at as, there's an assumption that they are going to turn out and vote Democratic. So with that, we've seen just a more aggressive fight for this vote. We've seen, the kinds of ads that they're putting out, the hiring that they've done in the campaign. We've seen Harris's campaign manager is Latina. It's things that in 2020 I was repeatedly hearing Latino strategists say needed to happen. Those moves have happened, but there is still this ongoing concern of how do you message to this new growing population?
And how effective is it? How much are these messages, even though they're going out now, how are they being received? You mentioned ads. I'd be curious, in what ways are Democrats trying to reclaim their hold on the Latino population?
In the past, there was such a focus on Spanish language ads, for example. It was like, your Latino outreach is how much you spend on putting ads on Univision and Telemundo. That was a key aspect. Or if you reached out to a campaign to ask, how are you doing Latino outreach? That would be the first thing that they would mention to you. In the case of Harris's campaign, we've seen them putting ads out that are not tailored towards Latino voters necessarily, that their ads targeting Latino voters are talking about democracy and January 6th, or talking about her biography, as coming from a middle-class family. This idea of Donald Trump both praising authoritarian leaders and just the fact that he would be one if he became president again. It's something we've heard not only in ads, but we've seen her talk about it in events, like a recent town hall that she did with Univision.
Donald Trump has said he will be a dictator on day one.
That's something she's talked about a lot on the campaign trail, but we've seen her really particularly focus on it when she talks to Latinos, given that so many have fled countries that turned to authoritarian regimes over the years.
Many people come from backgrounds and countries of origin, and we know what that means when you're talking about someone who wants to be president of the United States and wants to be a dictator, and what that means in terms of taking freedoms from their people.
And it's less on these caricatures of Latinos or these stereotypes that, Latinos just primarily care about immigration, and that's sort of the issue.
Interesting. So then what messages do you hear actually connecting with younger male Latino voters? In terms of what you're describing here, what is punching through?
Most recently, I was in Reading, Pennsylvania. Majority Latino city, at a Puerto Rican Day parade that they had there. And there was these two guys I met who I think really exemplify it. Xavier Alexander, Jose Lopez. They've lived in the area their whole lives, and they told me they just weren't planning to vote. They didn't feel informed enough about it, and they didn't like their options.
Why are you not going to vote this time?
Because I'm not up to date with it, so I don't want to just put my vote in and then say Trump or Camilla win by 1 point, and I'm the one vote there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't want to make the difference.
And I was also struck by just the amount of misinformation about the election that they had consumed.
I hate both of them. Camilla's going to send us males ages 18 to 24 to war, and Trump, he's horrible.
That was Xavier speaking, and he was talking to Jose, and Jose was agreeing with him that, he had heard a friend already receive a draft notice. And I had to sort of explain to them, well, first of all, that's not happening. That is not true. Harris is not planning to draft men 18 to 24. I even asked them, they were saying to war, and I was like, to which war? And they didn't have an answer to that question.
Yeah, where is that coming from? Is that a thing that you've heard spread more widely, that there's some sense that if Harris is president, that she's going to send large numbers of young men to the current war or new war?
I mean, there's some misinformation around that. There's some feeling of, Donald Trump positions himself as how there were no wars under his presidency and how under Biden there have been wars that have broken out. So there's just sort of this misinformation around what the future would look like in that case. But even just hearing them have that conversation sort of showed that they didn't know where they heard it. They didn't know exactly how they got that information, but that still was factoring into why they didn't like her. And in Xavier's case, you heard him say Donald Trump is horrible. So it wasn't that made him want to vote for Donald Trump, but he had that information, that incorrect information about Harris that was turning him off to her.
So how has what you've seen and heard started to translate into a real shift among some Latino communities away from Democrats and toward Republicans?
I think the number one thing to keep in mind here still is in poll after poll, we do see a majority of Latino voters backing Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. And we see her performing better with Latino voters than how we saw Biden performing with them while he was still running. But she is still lagging behind what his ultimate performance was in 2020 and what Democratic candidates have in recent times. So there is this question of, okay, why? What is it that's happening? And I think it was Mike Madrid, the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, an anti-Trump group, who really summed that up well for me by saying that this is the emergence of something new.
This is an emergence. They're not becoming more conservative. They're not shifting from Democrats to Republicans, although there are some. But if you look at the numbers, most of this change is from people that were sitting it out, didn't see anything to buy in either one of these parties, or have turned 18 in the last 4 years.
There are some Democrats who are going to go and vote for Donald Trump, but that is not the phenomenon that's happening here.
Interesting. So at least from your sense that this is not a case of people who see their identity as Republicans. It's people who, and as you said, in many cases, young men who, in a vacuum of having any real political identity, see Trump and see something that they like in Trump and are gravitating toward him because of that.
Yes. It's by and large people that I have talked to that are voting for Donald Trump in this election, Latino voters, particularly young men, they don't identify as Republicans. I hear them saying, well, no, I'm independent, or no, I consider myself nonpartisan. I don't really identify with one or the other. But they like his message, or they like his persona, or they like what, they think he offers the country. And I think that's something that we're going to see both parties, but especially the Democratic Party, have to grapple with in elections to come, of how do you message to a community that isn't identifying as closely with your party as they used to.
So before we wrap, I just want to come back for a second to Isai and Lizette, this family split along political lines with just a few days left until Election Day. Where are they at? What is it like for them grappling with this and thinking about what it means for their family going forward?
I think what we see with voters like Isai is, like I said earlier, this emergence of something new. And it really shows that, both parties going forward are really going to have to aggressively fight for this vote, and what we see with this family is sort of, again, families are grappling with this across the country. And this isn't over the day that the election is over. They have different views about who is the best person, and someone is going to be unhappy depending on who wins ultimately. But I think something that was striking talking to Lizette at the end of the day was that she was happy to see her son engaged.
And you know what? I always tell my kids, you gotta believe in something, or you're gonna fall for anything. So you believe in something and stick to it, and he's doing it.
But she did say, at the end of the day, she does have some hope and is still working on Isai to try and change his vote.
I still have time. So we'll see what happens at the end.
Sabrina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sabrina Rodriguez reports on voters for The Post. She spoke with my co-host, Martine Powers. Before I go, I wanted to tell you about a couple of other stories The Post is covering. First, there's an exclusive news story from reporters at The Washington Post about Amazon founder and Post owner Jeff Bezos. In recent years, Bezos' business interests in Washington have expanded, and my colleagues dig in to how much of his fortune is wrapped up in the federal government. You can read this reporting on WashingtonPost.com. And police are investigating 2 arson incidents where ballot boxes were burned and hundreds of ballots were destroyed. This happened in the Portland, Oregon metro area. Here, you can hear firefighters pulling out smoldering ballots that burned to ashes.
Hey, Di, they just opened up the box.
Police found the 2 drop boxes damaged by incendiary devices early Monday. They say these incidents are linked to a third earlier incident this month, when a suspicious device was found in a ballot box. Authorities have little information about a suspect, and the motive is unclear, but they said it appears to be targeted and intentional. Seeing these burned ballots kind of broke my heart. These are votes that were cast ahead of Election Day using drop boxes. Authorities said hundreds of ballots were damaged, but it could be tough to know who those damaged ballots belong to. The Clark County auditor said voters who dropped off their ballots after 11 a.m. Saturday should contact his office to receive a new ballot. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you're looking for another way to go beyond the headlines and really dive into the news from different perspectives, I have a show recommendation for you. The opinions section at The Post has its own podcast. It's called Impromptu, and you can hear Post opinion columnists having frank, thoughtful conversations on the news and cultural debates of the day. This week's episode is about whether Republicans who don't like Trump can be convinced to vote for Harris.
Are there any Republicans out there who, if you saw them announce that they were campaigning with Kamala Harris, it would really surprise you and even maybe influence you? Living or dead?
Well, all the dead ones would surprise me.
Dang it, you beat me to it. Dick Cheney, I think, with the idea of him going around there and a crowd of Democrats cheering Dick Cheney after loathing him throughout the entire Bush years, it would just spur me to want to build a time machine just to go back to 2004 and say, you are not going to believe how things have shaken out by the year 2024.
You can find Impromptu wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's show was produced by Laura Benshoff with help from Sabby Robinson. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Monica Campbell with help from Maggie Penman and Rena Flores. Thanks to Nick Bauman. I'm Elahe Izadi. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.